without further ado, we'll go ahead and kind of get into today's conversation here. So, Chris, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I want to kind of kick us off here, of course, setting the stage for folks and telling us a little bit about you, yourself, and Wesley Housing and kind of what brought you to this work.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris, and I'm glad to be here. Yeah, so Wesley Housing provides safe, quality, and affordable housing for DC and Virginia residents. And we recently merged and expanded our footprint further into Virginia. And so we serve 4,700 residents, 42 communities, and that equates to about 3,000 units. And what draws me personally is to this mission is everyone deserves a roof over their head and a community to thrive in. And what interests me is that with affordable housing, you need all sectors to come together. So you need the for-profit, you need nonprofit, you need government, and you need inspired individuals to make things happen. The whole community's got to come together to develop the community, and I like that. And also just one aspect with Wesley that I particularly like is we have community managers and property managers on the site, and we also have resident services staff who are trained social workers who are available and accessible on site to help with folks' needs on a more holistic level.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris, for kind of giving us a little bit of background on you and Wesley Housing and what brought you to them. So, want to kind of get into, again, kind of the conversation today about the impact scorecard, but want to also, of course, set that stage. So, do you mind walking us through kind of some of the key challenges that you encountered when you all transitioned into Apricot back in 2022?
Sure. So yeah, Wesley needed a more user-friendly, flexible case management system with robust assessment and reporting tools that would help the resident service staff as well as the external relations staff. And so we launched Apricot in the summer of 2022, and we provided, a big kickoff and launch day with lots of training and lots of materials available, data entry guides, user guides. I then followed up with, refresher trainings, office hours, and just more support and accessibility so that folks could jump in and get on board with Apricot. And so at that point, I thought, well, heck, we're on our way. As the admin, I was psyched and we were ready to go. So that was great. However, by early fall of 2022, I ran our first report to see what was in there. And I looked at the service logs and referrals and event attendance and program enrollments, and nothing came up. And so there was no data. And so I reviewed my own work, operator error, perhaps. Maybe I just wanted to make sure it wasn't me. And so I kind of eliminated that. And I realized I had to go back to the drawing board. And I did a sort of wash and repeat. All those trainings and refresher trainings and materials and written data entry guidelines and office hours. I sort of did a wash and repeat of what I'd done to just ensure folks were aware that you have to get your data in, you got to get it in on time. This is where you put the data. And eventually, beginning into 2023, we had reports that weren't empty anymore. And so that was good.
Nice. Yeah, I can't imagine how jarring that might have been to run reports and then see null or see nothing. It might not be too fun. Um, can you walk folks through the process of creating a board impact report or scorecard? Again, kind of what brought us here today, and walk us through that process and how you decided on the pillars, which I know the pillars are housing stability, education, community engagement, and health and wellness. So yeah, can you talk us through how you created those pillars and then ultimately that scorecard as well?
Yeah. So we wanted to be more, meaning the board and Wesley staff wanted to be more data informed and data driven, and getting Apricot was, a huge reason to help us get there. And We wanted to sort of shift away from relying entirely on anecdotes and stories, although those are always beneficial. We wanted to have a more strategic view, a more bubbled up, a more aggregate view of the activity and the accomplishments of our team. And so the vice president of resident services brought an Excel chart to me, a sort of blockish format and it was organized by service activity, the months, time period of a month, our geography, our regions, and by service pillar. And as Ashley mentioned, our service pillars are housing stability, education, community engagement, and health and wellness. And so Wesley had been talking about these pillars for a while. And the main concept is that, with housing, if you are able to stabilize a person's home, these other pillars are more attainable and more realistic. And so during the implementation, we made sure that pretty much half of the service activities in the document folder on the participant record had a field on it. And for every record, there was a chance for the user to select which service pillar this activity fell under. And, as an example, if the person was working in the eviction prevention area or distributing gift cards, that would fall under housing stability. And if they were, putting on or hosting an exercise class or a preventative health screening effort, that would fall under health and wellness. And so we do definitely know that many of our activities could fall into many of the pillars or all of them. And that's okay. But for the effort here, for the report, for ease sake of the user and the reporting effort, it's required that you select just one and that we ask that user at the time to choose what is most appropriate. And so that is the sort of format. And we run that monthly for our board.
I like what you mentioned about making sure that although you know that these activities can cross into multiple pillars, for the sake of reporting, they can only choose one. That's something that we kind of hear similar things across the board of like, you got to make this simple so that when it's time for reporting, it's not so messy, it's not so confusing. So just pick the main one, and then we can get into the nuance and like the nitty gritty later on. But definitely like that point, and it's a point that again we hear across the board with a lot of organizations. Awesome. Yeah, Chris, do you mind telling us like how you collaborated with the ASC consultant, excuse me, to automate those reports, and how did they help you kind of make that more efficient?
Oh, yeah. No, I could not do this without the ASC consultant. So I reached out and asked for help to build this, in particular because I wanted to use the results reporting features that does a lot more than the general reporting functionality. And without a doubt, they were able to put in calculations in this report that automate these counts so that I don't have to extract 10 different Excel charts and tabulate it myself. So absolutely a huge time saver. And when you say collaborate, yes, well, I would be, whenever he's available, I'll be there just to help me, absolutely needing the skill set there to help with results reporting. And then when new initiatives or new data or new funding things would come up, I would reach out and we would modify and add on to that report. And because this totally sped up the ability to count and track this type of the service pillars, it started to benefit other areas in the organization. So, a lot of what we're doing is reporting on grants we have. Well, our fundraising manager would call me up and say, hey, I'm working on a proposal or an application, and I need to know generally, what are our numbers in this area, or how are we looking in this area, this pillar or that pillar, and helping her decide what to present in a proposal to win the grant, to ask for funds. So definitely a huge time saver for all of us to have their skills and help with that report.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you mentioned about it not only saving you time, but having that trickle effect into other parts of the organization, which I think we all love to see all of our times get spent better and more efficient and get more time back on our end as well. So Love that point. Can you walk us through, Chris, how did you get the resident service team at Wesley Housing to kind of take ownership of their data and hold them accountable? I know that some organizations struggle with kind of the people on the boots on the ground getting that data in there. So, do you mind talking us through that and like what did they say when they first saw their service counts? Did you face any resistance along the way? What did that look like?
Sure. Yeah. So in the beginning, absence of data is a form of resistance, right? I'd say. So what happened was we got the board report organized and running, and the residence team managers would share the counts with the residence services coordinators as a way to motivate them, educate them, remind them to get the data in, and to hold them accountable. And after those meetings with their managers, I would often receive phone calls and asking lots of questions about Apricot and the process and which pillar to choose and what was the deadline I'm supposed to get this in by again. And so I knew that that was helping to show their counts and then circling back to me about, wait, what do I have to do again? And in one of those conversations, a woman, she was just so honest. She said, I apologize and I really need to be more intentional with my data entry. And after the last couple of years of working directly with social workers, I would say they are trained to be in front of people, not computers. And that's also a kind of form of resistance, but it's a good thing because don't we want them in front of people, helping people? Um, so I think where um, just reflecting on that beginning and the sort of work I was doing to educate them about where to put data in Apricot, it was really something to say, I need to do a better job of connecting the dots of why it's important to put the data in and that they are an important part and they are an important part of the bigger picture. Yeah. So, and I couldn't have
Yeah.
asked for a better answer from the social worker who said she needs to be more intentional. I mean, she wasn't defensive, she was honest,
Yeah.
and she was going to try harder next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said it beautifully that those folks are trained to be in front of people. They're trained to get, like I said, boots on the ground. They're doing the work. They're not necessarily trained to be very cognizant of that data entry. So it's a hurdle, especially when you have folks coming in from all different like technology journeys and how comfortable they feel with
Yeah.
technology. It can be definitely a learning curve. So I'm glad to hear that your staff, and specifically that staff member was not really defensive and took the time to understand, like you said, that connecting the dots of I'm not just asking you to do this to do this. There is an importance in inputting that data so that we have a better story to tell ultimately. So love
Yeah.
that. Awesome. How did you guys end up ensuring that your data wasn't only just meeting the needs of the board, but it also aligned with the funders and what funders expected from your reporting? Because I know sometimes those can kind of be not necessarily cohesive. So, yeah, do you mind
Yeah.
talking through that?
Yeah. So, well, more and more reports were being run out of Apricot. So, starting in 2023, a lot more reports were being sent to funders from Apricot. And just as a note, so I would go through the process of running a first draft for folks prior to the final report going out the door. And this was again so people could see where they stood and just remind them when the big deadline is. And I would note gaps or missing data and remind them again where to put it and when to get it in. Again, just that reminder that their data entry mattered. They're part of a bigger picture, connecting the dots. Their work goes into Apricot report goes out to an external body. And I have one big moment where I just grinned from ear to ear because the person called me up and said it was well in advance of when the final report was going to be due, well in advance of the first draft, and just said, I really want to know where I stand against this grant. Can you help me with this report? And to me, that was a moment where that showed that person was thinking about data and how to inform their day, thinking more strategically, just bigger picture was important, being proactive, months in advance. So I couldn't have asked for a better phone call. The if that shift hadn't have happened, and if it hadn't have happened with all of our resident services staff, we wouldn't be able to report much of data related items to the board or funders. It's a big
Right.
important shift.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, sometimes those aren't necessarily aligned. So glad to hear that we could get that with the shift. For sure. Chris, do you mind talking through what improvements you've noticed, if any, in the delivery of the services and operations due to that increased use of data? Like what have you seen in terms of the services you all provide? And if you could provide a specific example, that would be great. But yeah, what improvements have you noticed?
Oh yeah. So selfishly, I'll cover the data piece first. First of all, we have more data. So that's selfishly, I like to have that, right? So that helps us with a lot of things. But we went from 0 to 500 service activity counts in a month. So showing larger volume data means that we have something to analyze. That in itself was a great accomplishment, but we can see within that the types of activities and where resident services folks are spending their time, or perhaps where they're not spending their time. We could see trends. During the academic months, after school programs, you see a rise in supporting youth and education counts. At the end of 2024, we could compare all of 2023 to 2024. So we could compare year over year data for the first time. We could see that not only the levels of activity were rising and going up, and we were serving more people, but we had more confidence in our data in and of itself, and could say, okay, this is a reliable picture of us, and this is a baseline level of our activity. And all of that helps with being more organized, being strategic, improving your process. But my two other, other than the data being just a use for everything, we still have an annual gift distribution effort that had many, many, many pain points, just lots of duplication of effort, lots of challenges with too many systems being used to track the information. And with the help of Apricot Data and Apricot, we streamlined that effort. And I know that gift distribution effort is enormously much, much easier to get through. Another thing that I would say is in the last 6 months, I now have a quarterly meeting with the CEO on the systems that I manage, and one of which is Apricot. And so I think all of these examples are showing how Apricot and Apricot Data are more central to decisions now, and decisions in operations that were maybe more an afterthought before in the beginning. And we've really been able to shift the focus of data more in the center, and to be more data driven because of it.
Awesome. And I love to hear that you're meeting with the CEO quarterly and letting them know that, yeah, this is the systems that we're running, but in turns, because we have all this data within the systems, like you said, we can make more data driven results, or excuse me, decisions, and kind of focus more on that quantitative data as opposed to qualitative, which I know we mentioned or you touched on earlier, that of course qualitative and anecdotal is important and we love sharing the stories, but sometimes we do just need concrete numbers, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Chris, in what ways has the process of using the data to tell a more quantitative story influenced kind of the understanding of your resident service team's work and outcomes at the board level as well?
Yeah. So it's interesting, this sort of more data and more volume of data being shown. Another evolution was happening, and there were more eyes on the data. There was more input about the data. There were more perspectives being shared about the data that were not social workers and that were on the board and that were not in Apricot day to day. So one of the first observations was that the counts in our board report, the majority of them were outputs, not outcomes. And so the discussion of what about outcomes, and as an example, the person they find employment versus they attend a class to get employed. So the outcome is they are employed, that kind of outcome. And so, and just as a note, we do track outcomes in Apricot. We do have grants where we have to track outcomes and we report to funders about the outcomes, but it just wasn't on this board report. And so now we are in discussions to evolve the board report again to include outcomes. Um, but I feel like now's the moment because we're ready. We have the volume of data. We have a better understanding of how the resident services team works. The board has gotten a lot of exposure to this data about the process. We've culturally adopted Apricot. And so it feels like we have a board and a team that are more educated about the data and ready to make that jump from outputs to outcomes. And we will definitely lean on Apricot and the ASC consultant to help us evolve it again and bring those outcomes to the forefront.
Right. And I like what you touched on about it not only just being kind of like a technological adaptation of a tool, but it also has to come within the culture. Like your team has to become more data driven. They have to understand the importance of it, why you all are doing it. Like I said earlier, you're not just asking them to do it because you want more on their plate. It's like this is really important for everyone at the organization. And I like that you touched on how you use Apricot when it comes to grants and some of the outcomes that you are reporting because the grant needs you to report on X, Y, and Z outcome. So, yeah, definitely insightful there. And I know it would be remiss of us to not mention funding and also acknowledge kind of the uncertainty that I know folks on the line are likely feeling in terms of federal funding and what that looks like for so many organizations. Do you mind sharing what Wesley Housing is doing to kind of navigate this uncertainty and how that's kind of been affecting y'all?
Well, we are taking it one day at a time. We're using our resources wisely. We continue to and try to, with our revenue portfolio, maintain a best practice of diverse revenue sources. So we've got government and corporate and foundations and philanthropic and individuals. And then by the nature of our work, we have revenues that come from the properties we develop and manage. And so that's kind of the one day at a time approach, is making sure that those are still sort of a well balanced portfolio of revenue.
Yeah, and that's again, that's a big thing that we've been hearing a lot across several nonprofits is just the importance that's been placed upon them to diversify their portfolio and make sure that they're not only focused on federal grants or just grants in general, but also doing that individual fundraising, peer to peer, so on and so forth. It definitely feels more important now than I think ever for a lot of nonprofits. So, yeah, thanks for that insight, and I'm sure folks on the line can definitely relate to that. Um, but Chris, we have covered a lot of ground today. Lots of great things discussed. And before we get into the Q&A portion of things, I wanted to just ask if you had any final thoughts or wisdom that you'd like to share with some of the nonprofit leaders that we have on the line looking to improve ultimately how they kind of use their data to support their mission.
Sure. Well, I certainly believe being more data driven has improved our service delivery, our ability to secure more funders or funds in general, and has helped to align our stakeholders. And Apricot has been central to this effort. What, but as you've also heard, it doesn't all happen on day one. It takes time. Not everyone values data the same. Not everyone learns the same pace. Um, but I have experienced that if you want everyone to row in the proverbial boat in the same direction at the same time, it means you've got to get your data in order. You've got to get your data understood, and you've got to get your data valued to benefit the organization as a whole.
Definitely. Very insightful, very true. Got to get the team on board in valuing the data. That's ultimately, I think, kind of step one and the biggest piece so that everyone is on board with kind of collecting that data. So thank you for those final thoughts, Chris. And folks on the line, before we officially transition to more of the Q&A here, I want to launch another quick poll. If you are interested in learning more about Apricot specifically and learning more about how our tool might be able to help you all create your own impact scorecard or just take better control of your data and input. I'm going to launch another quick poll here. again, feel free to fill that out, and we can have one of our colleagues reach out to you after today's session to initiate those conversations and possibly get kind of a more detailed look into the tool here. But before we get started here, I'll let folks kind of fill that out here and kind of go through some of the questions we did receive. I do see a question that came from Marina, Chris. And kind of, do you mind talking through if you have any insight on kind of what data inputting, excuse me, looks like for those boots on the ground? Like, folks, do they come back to the office and input that? Are they inputting it on a laptop while they're out in the field? Or what does that look like from your perspective, if you have any insight on that to share?
Yeah, I do know that folks are definitely putting it in on a desktop at the office. And I know that they have maybe some laptops that are more mobile. But when you're talking about input, it's mainly I've heard at their desk at the office.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. And I know that we did have a couple of questions kind of looking in terms of wanting to see examples of your dashboard. I don't think, unfortunately, folks will be able to kind of showcase that live on today's call. But if you had any tips or insight that you could share, Chris, for creating those dashboards and maintaining them. I know we talked obviously a lot today about just the value of inputting that data, keeping it clean. But if you had any, coming from a database administrator, if you had any little more granular tips and tricks on how you get your dashboards to, I'm sure, look beautiful, do you mind sharing that with folks on the line?
So yeah, running the report prior to it being due gives you a lot of time to see where data is missing and the data gaps. And you have time to go back to the people or perhaps hold another training to get that data in. And then with uh, with the results reporting, I would say it helps with a whole lot of other maybe data gaps I might have. So I use the report almost to find the exceptions. For instance, if someone didn't fill in or connect or link something properly, I can see it in this report and I can nip it in the bud there and handle it. Um, the the nature of Apricot with its items in the document folder, um, results reporting can bring all of those together in one view, which is very important and very much needed for the type of report we needed. So um, either brush up on your skills on results reporting, because that is a very, very robust tool, and there are definitely ways to learn it, or find an ASC consultant to help you manage that, because that is a huge asset for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the tip. I've never really thought to do that, but I might take that into my own work here of running reports before they're due and identifying those gaps. I think that's really such a great tip and a great way to see, especially before anything is due to, higher ups or even the board, just seeing like, hey, nothing's showing up for this. Like you said, how you did do that and you saw nothing was showing up. So yeah, great tip and trick there. It looks like someone actually dropped your impact report for last year in the chat. So thank you, Ariel, for dropping that in the chat here. But I don't think I see any other questions coming through the chat or the Q&A right now. I'll give folks a couple of last minute seconds to drop them in here. But while they do that, Chris, again, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you for sharing with us, excuse me, about your data journey, about your impact scorecard and Wesley Housing and the work that you all are doing. Much, much appreciated. I think it made for a
Yeah.
great
Well,
conversation. And I love having these conversations with folks that are also passionate about this. It always makes for such a great conversation.
thank
So
you.
very
Thank you for having me.
appreciated. Of course. And folks on the line, thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. Always appreciate the questions and the engagement in the chat. Definitely makes for a more lively and fun session. But if there aren't any additional questions, I spoke too soon, maybe. We might have a question here. Let's see. Okay, perfect. This question, John, great question. I won't propose it to Chris because I think it's a little more technical in terms of kind of our tool. But John, I will have one of our colleagues follow up with you after today's session, and same for you, Dana, and your question. I'll have someone follow up with your question since they're a little more technical. But yes, thank you, Chris. Thank you, folks on the line. We very much appreciate it, and we definitely hope to see you at our next session. So with that, I will say goodbye, farewell, and I will see you all soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.